Hello and welcome to this two-part module where we look at the WTP plugins for Eclipse. My name is Richard Chesterwood. I'm one of the programmers and trainers at virtualpairprogrammers.com. This module is primarily for anyone who has already studied our Java web development or spring-mvc courses. But as long as you know about the basic concepts of Java web development, such as servlets, JSPs, WAR files, then you might find this course useful, even if you haven't been on one of our previous training courses. In this first part, we're going to install WTP, and then we'll look at the basic features. We'll write a simple servlet, then a JSP, and we'll see how the server integration works in the plugin. In the second part, we'll get a bit more advanced. We'll get hot deployment working, and then we'll take an existing project and we'll convert it to work under the plugin. Each part is about 30 minutes long, and we're going to start with a quick review of the work we did on the previous courses. Now, so far, I've written two courses for the virtual pair programmers that deal specifically with web applications. There was the Java web development course where we learn about servlets, JSP, MVC, JSTL, and all of the basic standard tools that Java has for building dynamic web applications. We also talk a little bit about web frameworks on that course. I happen to use struts, which isn't really a very good or modern framework, but I think it helps to give a really good grounding in Java web development. I also wrote and presented the spring-mvc course, where we extend the basic web development concepts to build a much more serious web application using the modern spring-mvc framework. I've written this short module about Eclipse plugins primarily for anyone who has followed either of those courses. If you haven't been on either of those courses, then you may still find this video useful, but I will be assuming that you already have a knowledge of Java web development. So I'll be assuming that you understand concepts such as servlets, JSPs, WAR files, and the web.xml file, and so on. Now, the decision I made when I wrote the courses was that we would not rely on any particular plugins or development environments. I used Eclipse on the course, but we really could have used any IDE because all I really did in the development environment was run the compiler. And I know that many of our customers prefer to use NetBeans and sometimes IntelliJ. And that's fine because I don't use any specific features of a development environment. Let's have a quick review of what we did on the courses. Now I have here the project that we built on the spring-mvc course. And if you've been on the Java web development course, then you'll see that the projects are very similar. I have no special plugins installed to Eclipse. The Java that I have here is, as usual, under an src folder, and there's a few packages there. I also put any XML configuration files that I need in there as well. My web pages are under a folder called Web, and I made the name of that folder up. That was entirely my choice. I'm not following any particular Java convention there. I also have a lib folder as well where my jar files are located. Because this is part of the spring-mvc course, we do a lot of things on the spring-mvc course like generating PDF files and web services and so on. So there are actually quite a lot of jar files in that folder. For a web server, I used Tomcat, which I was just running in a simple command prompt window. I'll just pull that up now. It's running outside of my development environment. Not particularly sophisticated, and I've got this rather ugly command window with lots of Tomcat logging appearing in there. Now I leave that running in the background, Now, the other piece of the jigsaw was on the training course I supplied an Ant build script, the build.xml file. You don't need to have any knowledge of Ant in order to use the course because I've already pre-prepared this Ant script. And all the script is doing is running the Java compiler and then building a WAR file and then copying that WAR file into the Tomcat directory. And I can run that build script in Eclipse by using run as ant build. And of course, that would be a very similar process in any other development environment. Once the script is run, I then switch across to my command prompt. And the way that Tomcat works is it polls the web apps folder every 2 seconds or so. And if you could just see that ticking over there was a little bit of logging appearing saying it's initializing a Spring Framework servlet. So that means that the web application has successfully deployed. As on the course, if I visit the URL localhost 8080 / my web app, and then on this particular course, the URL view allbooks.do takes us to this dynamic web page and a list of books appearing, which is coming from our backend Java. So that's how we were working on the course. And as I say, the beauty of this approach was that you can do this on any IDE. And also, I guess, it also helps you to understand what is happening under the hood. You're not having some kind of wizard or tool hiding any of the steps. And you can apply this knowledge to any project anywhere in the world. However, a few people have sent me messages since the courses were released saying that although this is okay, the project they're working on do use the plugins to automate away some of the steps. And they've asked me if I can cover how to use the plugins for Java web development. So in response to that, what I'm going to do on this very short tutorial is to take you through how to use the WTP plugin for Eclipse. Now, WTP, which stands for the Web Tools Platform, is the rather boring name for the set of plugins that you can use to do web development in Eclipse. The website for WTP is the website you can see here at the URL I'm showing you on the screen. And with this plugin, we're going to get things such as syntax highlighting, automatic creation of the Java classes such as servlets. We'll be able to manage our XML files, and probably most importantly, we'll be able to run Tomcat inside of Eclipse instead of that slightly clunky approach that I had of having Tomcat running in a command prompt window. So we need to start by installing WTP. And there are two ways. If you already have a basic Eclipse, as I have, then one way of installing the plugin is by installing it as you would any other Eclipse plugin. And you would do that by going to the Help menu in Eclipse and selecting Install New Software. You will need to enter the URL of the update site for WTP. And you can find the update site by following the link to Downloads. Now, this page may be different by the time you watch this video, but somewhere on this page there will probably be a link to their software repository site. And if I follow the link there, then the URL they're giving me here is the URL I would need to enter into the update site here. Now, that's an okay process, and technically it should be easy enough, but I must admit I tried this when writing this module, when writing the script for the module, and I had all kinds of problems which I think were to do with the server going down. I'm not sure, but to cut a long story short, it didn't work for me. Now, it may well work for you. Do feel free to try it, but clearly I can't give any support to you on that. Instead, there is a second approach to using the WTP, and in fact, according to the WTP website, this is the recommended approach, and that is to download an Eclipse with WTP already bundled. If you visit instead the eclipse.org website, this was probably where you got Eclipse from, and follow the link to download Eclipse, there's quite a bewildering array of different versions of Eclipse available, and you might well have been using either the IDE for Java developers or possibly Eclipse Classic, but there's also an Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers. Now this is just a regular Eclipse, but it has been pre-installed with lots of plugins including WTP. So I'm going to download Eclipse from there, and you can choose any of the mirrors that you like. Now that's going to take a while to download, so I'm going to pause the tape for a while and I'll rejoin you when this download is completed. Okay, well my download is now finished, and just off camera I unzipped the zip folder that I downloaded to a folder called Eclipse Java EE. Now remember that Eclipse doesn't really install like a regular Windows application might install. So it's absolutely fine to have two separate Eclipses on your system. This one here is my original Eclipse, the plain Eclipse with no plugins. I just have a separate folder here for the Java EE version. And just to save system resources, this is my plain Eclipse. I'm going to close that one down. It would be okay to run them in parallel probably, but just so my PC doesn't melt down, I've closed the old one, and now I just go into my Java EE version of Eclipse, find the Eclipse executable, and we're up and running. So I'm starting by opening the same workspace that I had open before, and notice that the workspace settings have all been preserved. But the big difference will be if I do a About Eclipse, we can see there the Java EE IDE for web developers. And if I just hold my Alt Tab, I've got a lot of other rubbish open at the moment, but you might just notice that the icon for this version of Eclipse is different to the regular icon. So what can we do with this version of Eclipse then? Well, before I do anything else, I'm going to ignore my MVC project and I'm going to close that file from before. And I'm going to create a new project just so I can play around a little bit and to try a few things out. And of course, if you're following along with me, you can do the same. If I go to the File menu and select New, nothing much here looks very different, but I can tell you if I click on the Other option, you actually now get a massive range of different project types that you can work with here. You'll notice there's a Java EE tab, for instance, and there's one for EJBs, and there's some for working with databases such as JPA. But the one we want is right down under the Web tab. And if I expand the Web tab, the important one is the Dynamic Web project. And this is a project which understands the concept of servlets and JSPs and also allows you to embed a server into the project. We'll click on Next. And for project name, of course, we can call it anything we like. Now, this is just a test project for me. That's entirely up to you. And now for the really important stuff. Don't click Finish here. We need to tell the project what type of server we're running with. Click on New Runtime. And wonderfully, we get here a whole list of different server types. You can see here there's all different versions of Apache Tomcat. And I'm guessing under IBM there's going to be WebSphere. Yeah, there's IBM WebSphere. And JBoss and Oracle and so on. If you're working on a commercial project, then you may well find these options useful. Now, on the training course, we used Apache Tomcat 6. So I'm going to select that right here. And if you wanted to, you could choose Tomcat 7 and go and download Tomcat 7 if you wanted to. So Tomcat 6, and then we'll click Next. And it's asking me now for the installation directory where I installed Tomcat. Oh, and if you don't have a Tomcat, you can actually download it from this button here, but we did supply a Tomcat with the training course, so I'll click on Browse, and on the training course we actually embedded the Tomcat into the workspace. So there's my workspace folder, and I'm just looking for the folder called Tomcat. And we don't need to go any further than that. Inside the Tomcat folder is bin and lib and logs and so on. So I'll select Tomcat there, and then we can go to finish. Everything else is now filled up with appropriate defaults, and we can now click finish. And that's going to create a brand new dynamic web project. Now we're being asked if we want to change perspective. I don't know if you know what a perspective is in Eclipse. That's just a window set. And because we're working on a dynamic web project, Eclipse is trying to offer us the option to change the windows to something more useful. So I've clicked on yes to that and remember decision. It doesn't really do very much, to be honest, but it does add an extra couple of tabs down here, one of which is servers, and there's also a data source explorer as well for querying databases. Now I won't be using that here, but that could be useful to you. Okay, well, where to start? I think the best thing to do would be to create a quick hello world servlet. Now before we do any coding, I'm going to drop down the tab here on our new project. And I think it's really important to point out that when working in a dynamic web project, Eclipse is going to insist on a particular project structure. Whereas before, I just created my own project structure and used my own conventions. This time around, I'm going to be following Eclipse's conventions. So first of all, notice that Eclipse has added a folder called Java Resources. And you can probably guess that under there is an SRC folder where our Java code is going to live. There's also a libraries tab there which will show us the libraries that we're using. We're not going to be using any JavaScript on this session. Build is where Eclipse is going to store all of the compiled binary. We don't really need to worry about that folder, but a really important folder is the web contents folder. Now this folder is going to be where we place any of our static web pages. So any HTMLs, any JSPs in fact will live in here as well. In fact, I should say this is where any publicly browsable content is going to go. This is the exact equivalent of the web folder that we had on the training course. It just has a different name. And you'll also notice that Eclipse explicitly puts the webinf folder inside web content. Now you know all about the webinf folder from the training courses. The webinf folder is where we're going to place any files that we don't want the users to be able to browse to. In particular, I'll drill down, in particular, the web.xml file. And we talked a lot about the web.xml file on our training courses. It's a crucial file, but it needs to be private. And so that's why it's under the webinf folder. So I hope you can see this is very, very similar to the structure that we had on the training course. It's just that Eclipse is using slightly different conventions. Well, that's enough talk. Let's actually get a server up and running. And I'm going to start a bit like I did on the Java web development course by writing a quick hello world servlet. And the best way to do that, rather than writing one from scratch like we did before, is to go File, New, and wonderfully, you'll notice that we have some pre-prepared defaults here. In particular, there's an option for a servlet right there. If I select servlet, I can specify a package. We can just make that one up. I'm going to be com.virtualpairprogrammers. Let's call it, I'll call this WTP testing, but you can use any package name you like there. And for the class name, this is going to be Hello World Servlet. The superclass is already filled in, and as on our training course, that's going to be HTTP servlet. I'll click finish. The skeleton structure of a servlet has already been created for us. Let me expand that tab, and it's already extended HTTP servlet. It's already added a doGet method with the correct request and response parameters set up, and it's also got the correct exception declaration on the signature. It's also added a do post in case we need it. And it's also added a constructor. Again, that's just in case we need one. I think we very rarely actually do anything inside constructors in servlets, but you never know, it might be needed. Notice that the visibility of the do get and do post methods have been left at protected. Now, I'm not entirely sure I can work out exactly the reasoning behind that, but I can tell you that it's fine to leave them as protected. If you prefer, you could change these to public as we did on the training course, but that's really entirely up to you. As on the training course, I'm going to go straight into the doGet method. I'm going to add some servlet code. So I'll declare a print writer and I'll call it out. And as always, we get that from the response object via the getWriter method. And I mustn't forget to set content type to be text HTML. So they're the two boring steps that I have to follow before I can do anything in a servlet. And I'll use Control-Shift and O to automatically add the import for print writer. Again, as on the training course, I'm just going to output something very, very basic here. This is just about the world's worst servlet that you're about to see here. Don't be too offended. I'm just going to do a header one. Hello, everyone. The date is, I do want to do a little bit of dynamic content here, so I'll just add in a new instance of Java util date, which will call it a string method and will therefore output the current date and time. I'll end that with a closing h1 tag. So I will then close the out object. So a very routine servlet there. And when we did this on the training course, we had to run the Ant script. We then had to check the command prompt window to make sure that the deployment had happened, and we had to wait several seconds for that to work. It was all a bit of a pain. But the beauty of a dynamic web project is I can now just right click on the file and select Run As, and then Run on Server. Let's see what happens. First of all, I think this is because this is the first time we've run the application. It's asking us to confirm that we're running on a Tomcat 6 server and that the host name is localhost and so on. I think I'll click on Always Use This Server. And I think we can go to Finish there. And now let's have a careful look at what's happening. Well, we can see Tomcat's now appearing in this Servers tab. And, oh, right, I have a problem. It's saying that my port 8080 is already in use. That's because I've actually left my, if you remember, I had a command prompt version of Tomcat earlier. I need to press Control-C to kill that. Or I could close the window and then we should be able to run as run on server. Wonderful. Well, a couple of things to notice there. First of all, I don't know if you saw, but on the console, the red text we're seeing here is the logging from Tomcat. So rather than having that in some command prompt somewhere, it's now all appearing inside the development environment. But, well, you've already seen that we're getting a tab now appearing in our editor, which is actually a web page. This is an embedded web browser, and it's outputting the result of that servlet running. In fact, if I hit F5, that's going to rerun the servlet, and you can see my clock, as if by magic, is dynamically updating. Now that's quite nice. This browser's quite useful, but it's not really a professional quality browser. You can always copy the URL that you can see here, and you can always safely go to a real browser. Here I'm in Google Chrome, for instance, and that's my web app that I was running before. But I can add that URL directly into this external browser, and you can see that I'm getting exactly the same output. So although Tomcat is running inside the development environment, it's also accessible outside of the development environment as well. Now, I can't remember how long it took us to write a servlet on the Java web development course, but that was certainly a lot quicker using this plugin approach. Notice that we didn't have to alter the web.xml file at all. And that's because it automatically, when we created the servlets, it automatically, if I just drill down into web content, webinf, and I open up the web.xml file. By the way, by default, you'll get this XML editor that's built into Eclipse. I don't personally find this particularly helpful or useful, but you can click on the source tab here, and that will take you into the raw web.xml file. And you can see that the plugin has automatically added the servlet tag and the servlet mapping tag. So you can now perfectly well edit what you can see here if you need to tune the defaults that have been added by Eclipse. I'm going to leave those in place for now. So that's servlets. I think we'll now have a go at writing a simple JSP page. We can go to the project menu and go for new. And as you can see there, there's an option for a JSP file. The JSP file will by default be dropped into the web content folder. And of course you can create subfolders in there if you want. And I think on the Java web development course I wrote a very basic Hello World JSP page at first, if I can spell it correctly, called squares.jsp, where we wrote the first 10 square numbers to the web page. I'll do the same again here, and you don't need to step through the wizard here, you can go straight to the finish option. As with a servlet, you'll get a basic template created by default, and I'm going to change the title for first 10 square numbers, and inside the body we'll do a little header, first 10 squares, and then as on the Java web development course we'll use a scriptlet tag, and we will use the out.println, and notice here that we now get full IntelliSense happening here. We didn't have that before in the basic Eclipse. With the plugins, it does feel like regular natural Java coding. I'm going to output, I'll need a loop in place here, but I'm going to output a square number right there. So let's set up a Java loop for I equals 1, and we'll run to I being less than or equal to 10, incrementing I each time, just adding in the curly brackets. By the way, if you haven't been on our Java web development course, don't worry. It really does get a lot more sophisticated than this. This was just our very first Hello World test. Now, before I run this, just for now, I'm going to stop the server running, the server that we had up and running before, by hitting the big red terminate button here. Now I'm going to talk in a short while about how we can remove that step from the process, but for now, to keep it simple, we'll stop the server. Once we've stopped the server, I will do a right click and a run as run on server again. And once again, inside our embedded browser, we can see the output of that scriptlet, the first 10 square numbers. I could do with doing some styling on there. I'll do that in a short while. And as before, I can use the URL here inside a proper browser, in this case Google Chrome, and we'll have exactly the same output. So that's how to set up a JSP. So the big advantages here are that we have full syntax highlighting, including for the Java code, and we also have a full IntelliSense in place. Now, of course, on the training courses, we don't use scriptlets for very long. We learn far more sophisticated approaches such as MVC, and for that we do need to use the JSTL library, which is the Java Standard Tag Library. And I won't demonstrate it here because it's very straightforward, but when you use the Java Standard Tag Libraries in exactly the same kind of way, you will get IntelliSense popping up when you're using the tags such as for each. So we've got the WT plugins installed. And you've seen that writing a servlet and JSP is quite easy, and we don't have to use any Ant scripts or worry about running Tomcat in a separate program. Now that we've got those basic building blocks in place, in part 2, we'll get a bit more serious. We're going to look at how to set up hot deployment, which should make for much quicker and more agile development, and then we will take your existing project, either from Java web development or the spring-mvc course, and we will convert it to work under these plugins. So I'll see you soon for that.